and welcome to Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
'Ndrangheta, camurra e mafia, leggi d'onore, leggi d'omertà. 'Ndrangheta, camurra e mafia, e cosgarrano da pietà. C'erano castello con tre stanzi, onde la prima puzzava infamità. Tre cucci sangue da seconda non ci trovai, mentre in da terza nu corpo in società. Degni e meritevoli fu riconosciuto, sotto all'albero la scienza battiato. Onorato circolo, a tutti vi saluto, fino alla morte a voi sovvincolato.
Let's do it.
And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
Welcome to Mob Talk Radio. As you know, I am your host, Jeff Canarsie. And the first thing out of the gate, I'm not sure. I'm just going to be straight up with you. I'm not sure if we're going to get to the Philly Mob Wars today. And the reason for that is the Rat Files is really big. And one of the typical problems that I'm having is when I record this visually and I record this audio, to put that all together really presents a problem because computers only have so much RAM, and I've had to airdrop stuff and put it here and put it there. And it seems like the upload time is like 3.5 hours just to get this really uploaded. So I'm going to do my best today to get to the Philly stuff. But if we don't, then that'll be a part of next week. And so what you'll get today is you're going to get the Q&A. You'll get the intro where we always talk about everything. And we'll cover the Rat Files because the Bonanno Rat Files is very big. And I honestly am going to try to keep these shows now at 2 hours max. So once I get to, excuse me, once I get towards the end of the Rat Files, I'm going to look and see how long everything is. And if it's way too long, then we'll come back next week and do the Philly stuff, 100%. So I wanted to welcome everybody to the show. Hopefully you're watching this and you could be listening to this as well. The first thing I want to do is apologize for there not being a live show last night. There's a reason for it. And I think a lot of it is just, and I'm trying to say this with all due respect, I think there's a lot of stuff going on right now that I just don't want to comment on. It's not for any other reason than I'm just going to mind my own business for once. So for all of you that are coming here thinking that I'm going to talk about the elephant in the room, you're wrong. I'm not going to say nothing. And while I know all of you are going to invariably ask me on Sunday, because our next live is going to be Sunday at 8:35. If you ask me about it, I'm going to act as if the question isn't there. I don't want to talk about it at all, and I'm not going to. And I have my reasons for it, all of which have to do with how I feel about certain things. Okay, just so you guys all understand. That's just kind of where I stand. Now, for those of you that are looking for merch, I've been getting a lot of emails about merch. You can go onto our YouTube page, and there should be a little tab that says store. Okay. Excuse me. You can click on there, order anything you want. We are going to be switching over everything this week. So there's going to be some new stuff added, some old stuff taken away. So if you're interested in getting a shirt, head over to the merch store and grab up your merch. Now, as far as lives go, we are going to typically, I think at this point, stay to just a Sunday live. The reason being for that is that Thursday night, you know, you got football, you got everything else. And with football season coming up, you know, coming on at 8:30 at night, you're going to lose people. But it looks like 8:35 on Sundays is really where we need to be. I think that is a good place for us to be. I think Thursday nights is just a goofy night. You'd almost be better off doing Tuesday and Sunday. But at the same time, I don't think we're going to change how much we do the lives. I think they're going to stay the same. For those of you that haven't watched, head over to YouTube, click the live features, and you'll see all the live shows we did. We had on Tom LaVecchia the other night. We had a good discussion with that. And, you know, that's pretty much it. Now, as far as the fall, because I'm also getting questions about this TV streaming thing that we're going to do, we are going to be shooting episodes probably at the very tail end of this month, beginning of next month. We're not going to release anything till I think we at least have 3, and we've sort of changed what we're going to do. I have yet to tell my partner about this, but I guess he's going to find out. Like, we're only going to do 6. I'm not going to do 12. We're only going to do 6, and we're going to see how it plays out. If it does not do what I think it should be doing, then we probably won't, you know, go beyond that. But it's trial and error. It's trial and error. That's pretty much what we're going to be doing. So for today, we are going to do a Q&A. We're going to do the Rat Files. I'm going to try to get to the Philly War because the Q&A was very short this week. Not a lot of people asked a lot of questions. So we're going to see what we can get to. I'm trying to keep this under 2 hours, so hopefully I just won't have too many rabbit trails. Now, there is something I want to talk about. In case you guys are unaware, Tori Bonanno is the grandson of Joe Bonanno. And I guess over on our Facebook page, and for those of you that are listening, go to the link, which I'll provide, and the dashboard of Supercast, and you'll actually see what Tori Bonanno said. All I had posted was a series of FBI memos in the last couple of days. And then I think I said something like, come to the show this week, listen to the facts that Joe Bonanno and Bill Bonanno were rats. Well, first of all, Tori Bonanno apparently doesn't know who I am, because underneath one of my posts, he decided to spew the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard. Now, with all due respect, I understand what it's like when you want to defend family. But I've never seen such an ill-equipped defense in my life. And if those of you that are watching this, it says, you guys should really do your research before you start talking about stuff you know nothing about. The Bonannos talked about working with the FBI in all of their books. Yes, they exchanged information about their enemies. They weren't rats. They never fucking ratted on their own. They ratted on those that were revolting from within the family. And the opposing families, don't be exposed as morons. Do research before you start producing weak information. I like your guys' work, but don't be idiots. Do your research. So, Tori, you dumb fuck. Number 1, ratting is ratting. You cannot justify it. If you talk about anybody, you give information to the FBI on anybody, guess what you are? You're a fucking rat. You're a fucking rat. Look at this. As the Bureau is aware, the NYO expended considerable effort to develop New York C-TE. Joe, basically, they're talking about Bill Bonanno. During the early part of his development, he furnished information of considerable value to the Bureau. During this time, the informant had a personal problem involving his father, which was capitalized on in his development, which resulted in Special Agent Richard Anderson being able to develop an extremely close relationship with him. He was a rat. Bottom line. But it's funny. He says, oh, they never ratted in 3 sentences. Then he turns right around and says, oh, they only ratted on other people. The people revolted within your own fucking crime family because of the ineptness of your uncle and your grandfather. I'm sorry. And I know that's your family, and I know that's tough to hear. But you apparently need the fucking lesson, number one, because I got more paperwork on your family than probably anybody in existence, number one. Number two, if you knew anything about me, you'd know I do my motherfucking research better than anybody on earth. Okay? And number three, you little shit, you obviously don't know nothing about the fucking streets, because dropping a dime on anybody is a rat fucking move. Especially when it kept your uncle out of fucking jams. I noticed you didn't mention anything about him being in Altoona and giving the FBI an interview and giving them the names, ranks, and titles of every other fucking crime family known to man. Oh, so every crime family was your enemy? Oh. This is the shit I'm talking about. You should really do your research. Because if you want to live in the coattails of your relatives, that's one thing. But this is the stupidest fucking thing I've ever seen. And if you wanted my attention, you're going to get it, and it's not going to be very flattering. Because, my opinion don't really fucking matter much. I got to be honest. My opinion does not matter. The street's opinion matters, and everybody says they're fucking rats, and I got all the paperwork. So you can try to weave this little tapestry to make yourself feel better. But the reality is, it is what it is. Proof. Proof is in the files. That's why I'm all about files. So, that's all I got to say about that. Hopefully, we're going to get to the Philly stuff today, guys. I'm really going to try, because I just don't want to give you just a Q&A and then the rat files. But I may have a lot of opinion on these rat files. So, we'll see what happens. But what we're going to do, I'm trying to see if there's anything else I missed here. I don't think so. Sunday, we will be live at 8:35. Please come enjoy and realize that I am not under any circumstances going to talk about the shit. So you can ask all day long, but I'm not going to say anything at all. So we're going to take a break. We come back. We're going to get to the Q&A portion of the show. Like I said, it's not very long, guys. I apologize, but we just didn't get a lot of questions. So stay tuned on Mob Talk Radio.
Another day, another night, I long to hold you tight, 'cause I'm so lonely. Baby, I need your loving, got to have all your loving. Baby, I need your loving, got to have all your loving. Some say it's a sign of for a man to beg, then weak I'd rather be. If it means having you the key, 'cause lately I've been losing sleep. Baby, I need your loving, got to have all your loving. smile you might see has all been hers. Darling, I can't go on without you. This emptiness won't let me live without you. This loneliness inside, darling, makes me feel half alive. Baby, I need your loving. Got to have all your loving. Baby, I need your loving. Got to have all your loving. Baby, I need your loving. Got to have all your loving.
Yeah.
What is it good for?
Absolutely
Nothing.
Yeah.
What is it good for?
Absolutely
Nothing.
Say it again, y'all. Look out.
What is it good for?
Absolutely
Nothing.
Listen to me. Oh, I despise. 'Cause it means destruction of innocent lives. War means tears to thousands of mothers' eyes when their sons go off to fight and lose their lives. I said war. Good God, y'all.
What is it good for?
Absolutely.
Nothing.
Get said again.
War.
Oh, Lord.
What is it good for?
Absolutely.
Nothing.
Listen to me.
War.
It ain't nothing but a heartbreak.
War.
Friend only to the undertaker. Oh, war is an enemy to all mankind. The thought of war blows my mind. War has caused unrest within the younger generation. Induction, then destruction. Who wants to die? Oh, war. Good God, y'all.
What is it good for?
Absolutely.
Nothing.
Said.
War.
Oh, yeah.
What is it good for?
Absolutely.
Nothing.
Listen to me.
War.
It ain't nothing but a heartbreaker.
War.
I got one friend, that's the undertaker. Oh, war has shattered many a young man's dreams. Made him disabled. Bitter and mean.
And so, we are back here on Mob Talk Radio, obviously, and we are going to start the Q&A portion of the show. And per every Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, over on Facebook, you can type in Mob Talk Radio. We will put Q&A and go, and that is your opportunity to ask any fucking question revolving around organized crime historically that you want to know, and we will answer it here on this show. But if you are not comfortable asking a question on Facebook, we certainly understand that. And you can email the show at mobtalkradioshow@gmail.com. All right, so like I said, guys, the list is not very, very big this week. We just didn't get a lot of questions. I don't know particularly why. So I'm not going to try to breeze through this, but it's probably not going to be very long. And then we'll get into the rat stuff and sort of go from there. So the first question is, has a confessional from a priest or a pastor ever been used in any trial? Has a priest or a pastor ever testified? So here's the thing. So priests often are covered by religious viewpoints, right? So whatever you say to a priest in a confessional, as a matter of fact, they cannot say to law enforcement. So you can go in there and say, I whacked 6 fucking motherfucking 6 pricks yesterday. And a priest is going to clam up. Sorry, guys, the lights get really friggin' hot in here. In any event, so a priest cannot be, I'm thinking of the legalese word. They cannot be forced to testify against anybody. But there have been instances where priests were called as witnesses. Raymond Patriarch or ring any bells. Go ahead and look up that case for yourself. But I think twice he used a priest. Once it was for like an alibi and something that was said. And I think for the second time it was against Judge Bevilacqua. So you can look that up for yourself, but absolutely, Jamie, they have been used. All right, just being an associate, how would Lefty Rosenthal be privy to so much detailed mob information like high-level mob murders and other mob business? Well, I mean, the simple way of answering that is because he was in direct contact with bosses. I mean, it's that simple. He was such a high-level associate that he had direct contact with bosses. Rosenthal wasn't just an associate in sort of the terms that we use loosely. I mean, this was a guy who was responsible for putting tens of millions of dollars in the pockets of the mafia. Therefore, I mean, he would have been privy to a lot more things than other people. That's just the reality. And I think a lot of what Rosenthal said didn't really lead to a whole bunch of convictions. But he also was so ingrained in that lifestyle and had been for 30 some fucking years that he knew that the guys Chicago might likely use for those sort of things. And the fact is, listen, I'm privy to shit and I'm nobody, but I'm privy to shit that a lot of you would never be privy to. And I think it just comes down to who you are and how much people trust you. But that would explain why Rosenthal had a lot of leverage and had a lot of information, because he dealt directly with bosses. A lot of people think he went through Nicky. He didn't need to go through anybody. He had direct contact, All right, Jeff, what's up? So we all know your stance on rats. My question is to your knowledge about how connected was Jimmy Fradiano. I know he was a made guy in L.A., but it seemed like he bounced around places like Cleveland, Chicago, and then there's that famous photo with him, Gambino, Sinatra, Castellano, and etc. In the interview he drops a lot of names like Trafficante, Joe Iuppa, Sam Giancano, Johnny Roselli, and Meyer Lansky, Benny Siegel, and his interactions with them. Well, Fradiano was a boss at some point, at least according to himself. He was a high-end earner, and he was a respected guy, whether people like that or not. But so was Joey Massino, and look how that ended. Fradiano also had a lot of ties to a lot of different people globally, like especially Australian mafia, because Fradiano was a little different. We talk all the time about narcotics trafficking, and that was one of Fradiano's things, right? But he had drug routes from Australia into San Francisco. Fradiano, smuggled in and he smuggled out, which is a little different because most mob guys imported, right? This guy fucking exported too. He came up under Dominic Brooklier and was named boss, or at least named himself boss, in 1975 when Dominic was in prison. And where the disagreement seems to come in is that while Dominic was in prison, Fradiano was ordered to kill Frank Bompensero. And Fradiano didn't want to do it because they were close friends, and he kept holding back. And it enraged Dominic Brooklier. And so the legend is that Fradiano named himself boss because Brooklier said, we never named him boss. We never gave him nothing. He named himself fucking boss. But it's also been said that Fradiano formed his own crew inside of L.A., and named himself acting boss. And then he begins to move against Dominic Brooklier. And this is where all the bullshit problems sort of come from. So Fradiano, depending on what you want to believe, he wasn't just some fucking dunce at all. He had acumen, he had earning abilities, and etc. But that's where the distortion, I think, sort of comes in. The second part of his question is on the topic of Fradiano. Did you ever hear the story of Chicago hitman Frank Schwayze was sent out to L.A. to kill Fradiano, and Fradiano saw Schwayze. He went running for his life. Apparently, Fradiano was scared shitless of Frank from a source that I read. I've never heard that before, but it wouldn't shock me either. I can tell you this little secret. Phil Leonetti was terrified of Phil Narducci. I can tell you that. There are a lot of people that are terrified of Phil Narducci. Still today. And in the old days. So... all right, let's see. I love how Jeff Nadeau. Hold on, let me get rid of this. I love how Jeff Nadeau, a kid, keeps himself very sheltered and protected. He says there's no way any content creator on YouTube in the mob genre could ever know or be friendly with an alleged mobster. To my knowledge, you helped save the life and the ass of Phil Narducci. You also helped during the Joey Merlino J.R. Rubio trial. almost sacrificing yourself and your freedom. You are the only content creator that's willing and has been willing to sacrifice himself for South Philadelphia. And South Philly needs a voice. And it's not even safe for them boys anymore to have a voice for them. Never taken a back step. I've been a resident of Philadelphia for 42 years. The only city left, no matter how bad the government fractures their institution, but can never destroy them. Keep it up. Keep fighting the good fight. No question, just a shout out. Niccolo, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. So here, look, let me just think about how I want to answer this. Number one, it's public information. If nobody believes me, go see Phil. Letting the dude get off of mommy's couch, put on his fucking elevated shoes, and let him go down to Chicks and let him just ask Phil. Just go ask Phil. Say, hey, do you know Jeff Canarsie? He's going to tell you absolutely. Did he really help you out? He's going to go absolutely. And then he's going to smack the fuck out of Jeff Nadeau for even coming into his place. Probably not. Phil wouldn't do that. So the question, the question is, and it's more going to be an overall statement. Jeff Nadeau will say anything that he can because he has an inferiority complex. I'd call it a Napoleon complex, but I think Napoleon was taller than that fucking kid. At least Napoleon had nice hair. I don't know what Nadeau does with his hair, but it just looks like fucking 3-year-old cut it with a pair of scissors in the bathroom. So here's my thing. He can say that nobody from the streets would ever be friends with a content creator. You're right. I would agree to that to a large extent with somebody like you, because you lie about them. You've told lies about everybody. You've invented scenarios, put people in murders they never fucking committed. You've run your mouth about fucking everybody, and you put every rat known to man on your motherfucking show. That's why they won't befriend you. Me, I don't have those problems. And if you keep running your little dick licker, you little fuck, believe me, you ain't tall enough to ride this ride to begin with. But this is what people do who have inferiority complexes. He wants so badly to be known, to be famous for something other than a 3-foot-tall Albanian piece of shit who's never had a real job in his life, who's lived off mommy and daddy. And then he has his little gambling empire, which it's funny because if you look into that, he rips people off. He's got like a 30% accuracy on gambling. His fame came through Barstool and they got rid of him. Well, he quit because he asked for more money, but nobody liked him there. And he used to tell people there he bookmake for Joey Merlino. He used to bookmake for Stevie Mazzone. All lies. He even tried to tell me that, and I started laughing. And that's the problem with people like that. And it leads me to what I'm about to say. And I'm sure my buddy Andrew's going, oh, man, don't go there. Just leave it alone. Leave it alone. Here's my thing. I have said this 100,000 times. I could know Jesus Christ. That don't mean I can walk on water. I could be pals with Jesus Christ. Doesn't mean I can cure the blind. I may know Jesus Christ, but I cannot cure your fucking leprosy. Just because you know somebody. I'm looking right in the camera now, right? Just because you know somebody don't make you nothing. Your reputation, you little shrimp, is based on you, not on anybody you might know. I don't give a fuck who I know. I know some of the most sadistic fucking men you could ever meet in your life, in all different states. Who I know doesn't make me tough. Because you know what? Unlike these people, I don't call 911 when somebody threatens me. I'll handle my business myself. This little shit will call the cops. He will. And he sends these little half-assed threatening emails all the time of, oh, I'm going to say this. Say whatever the fuck you want. But you better make sure that you can run as fast as your mouth moves. Because I'm telling you, you're fucking with the wrong one. You have been from day one. There's a lot of things I could say, a lot of things I could do, but I don't because you're a pigeon. And everybody knows it. You think everybody likes you. You'd be very surprised who can't stand you. And it's because of your mouth. It's because of your mouth. So like I said, it doesn't matter who the fuck you know. I don't brag about anybody I know. When people ask, I tell them, yeah, I know them, so what? But if you don't believe me, go down there. Go down to Chicks Billy. I can't tell you how many people listen to my show and said, hey, I'm going to go down to Chick's and I want to try his food, Phil's food. I said, yeah, go ahead. I said, when you're there, tell him you know me. You don't know how many people have come back to me and told me he gives them free shit because of that. So don't tell me I don't know nobody. And you know what? To me, he's just Phil. Whatever the FBI wants to allege, whatever they want to say is on them. Or I tell you what to do. Why don't you come with me? And I tell you what, I want you to come with me like 6 months from now someplace. And I want you to walk in and I want to see how you're treated. You think you're big time. You think everybody loves you. Please come with me somewhere. I'll even pick you up. You'll have to ride in the trunk because I don't have a child safety seat. But that's the thing. Put up or shut up. Don't talk about it. Be about it. All right. Were there any families in particular that would profit from the San Gennaro Festival? Yeah, typically, I mean, if you believe what the feds have to say, the Genovese crime family, they've allegedly always controlled the festival. And they said, from what I understand, they still do, but I don't know specifically. But it's funny because I go there all the time. It's starting. It's starting in a couple of, I think, towards the end of this middle of the month. I can't wait. You'd be shocked the amount of guys that are there. It's unreal. Big time people. Were Nicky Scarfo and Salvi Testa the Vic and Gas of Philly? In some ways, yeah. Some ways, no. I mean, Salvi was just getting his retribution, right? And I guess that's similar to the bloodletting that Casso went on. But an angry Casso is a kind of a funny Casso. I got to admit it. It's sick and macabre, but I think both of them were more like Casso in reality because Nicky was just almost fucking psychotic. All right, my buddy Dean. What's up, Jeff? Love the show. The question I asked that was kind of confusing was, why didn't Vito Rizzuto start a war with the New York faction the moment guys started getting clipped? I know he never believed that a drug dealer killed his man. He knew Messino killed a guy. And I see, I'm confused again. It's just like all over the place, Dean. Nothing personal. But I think I know where you're going with this. And I know the other families did not want a war with the Canadian faction, knowing how many men Vito had. It was global and a fucking army and ready at any time. George from Canada, Shasha was the guy killed, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, Gerlando Shasha. That's what you're talking. Okay. Gerlando Shasha. Okay. So it's still a little confusing, but I know what you're talking about. So the best way for me to answer this, and you may not like my answer, Dino Machino, but you cannot risk retaliation in that instance, because let's pretend he goes to war with Joey Messino. Or the New York faction of the Bonannos. I mean, the other four families are going to start looking for weaknesses in the line, and then they're going to start moving into Canada. And you cannot risk that on any level. I mean, not to say other families would have gotten involved, but if you go at one, other families might join the Bonannos in a coup to take over Canada. And as far-fetched as that might sound, that's the real risk you put yourself in. I mean, why give up a foot, then be expected to give it all up? And so there's really not a specific answer that I can give you that I think is going to be like put you on one side of the fence or the other. But I think it's all about longevity. And the less heat, the less war you have, the better off you are. Just watch the last two seasons of The Sopranos. And that sort of just shows you how shit starts and how ugly and how bad it can get. And that's exactly why I think, Rizzuto's like, it's only so much. Like if you look at I think it's season 5 of The Sopranos, Phil Leotardo starts his shit. Tony Soprano makes it even with Johnny Sacrimoni, but Phil Leotardo has visions. He has dreams of being something better. So surreptitiously, they're picking each other off. And finally it gets to the breaking point where Tony has to kill his own cousin because his cousin got involved with somebody else, a New York family, and he has no other choice but then to kill his cousin. He didn't want to do it. Tony Blundetto, played by Steve Buscemi. He has no other choice. But that didn't stop the bloodletting. Tony gives them what they're really wanting, but because they didn't get exactly what they wanted, the bloodletting continues. And we know how it goes from there. Let's see. Were Michael Francese's handlers sharing their intel with DeVecchio and Greg Scarpa, or were they being played off each other respectively? Well, I think they played off one another, to be honest. Like this case agent, is looking for information on something that goes back to, say, 1968, right? Scarpa provides that. But then they go to Scarpa and ask, and he confirms, denies, or adds to it. Or they go to Francis. Like Scarpa tells them, like they hear something about something, they go to Scarpa, he says yes. Then they'll go to Francis to have him double down on it. Because then they figure in, okay, now we get two rats that are telling us the same fucking thing. And I think that's pretty much how it goes. I think a lot of what the FBI does in terms of those FBI reports and the memorandums is corroborate intel. I think that's all it is. And sometimes you can even corroborate the intel by just looking at different FBI field reports. You know, not to say that they're 100% accurate. And sometimes the information they tell is totally fucking off and wrong. You know, a Made guy once said to me, you see these charts? And we were looking at stuff. And he looks at me and he's pointing at the chart. He goes, look at this middle line. Who the fuck are these guys? He goes, they look like castaways from the fucking Addams family. Because he didn't know any of them. It's like it was like a bullshit police lineup where they pull people out of a shelter and put them all against. He goes, look at these fucking guys. They're castaways from the fucking Addams family. I don't know a single one of these pricks. And they're in the middle line. So it goes to show you that the FBI doesn't always get it right. You know, but sometimes they do. It's not from the informants, but actually sort of surveilling themselves. They can kind of see a pecking order. You know, and listen, for anybody else that puts together, anybody that puts together anybody that puts together family charts is just, you know, are they 100%? No, they're not. And I don't mean that as a slander on anybody, but why would you want to do that? But to each their own. What do you think is the reason that the New York bosses stopped picking the Philadelphia boss? Were they concerned? And that maybe one day somebody would say no to their choice. Well, why get involved in the drama, right? They tried it twice, didn't work out. Why get involved in the petty bullshit? You know, if it's not in their financial interest to get involved, what the fuck do they care? You know, everybody's tried to control them from day one, and it hasn't worked. But I'm going to tell you this, and if God strikes me dead tomorrow, so fucking be it. But I think you're going to see New York get involved again. Just kind of have that feeling. And I can't tell you how or why, it is what it is. Would you ever consider doing a meet and greet in Kansas City? There is a lot of mob history here, or is that too far to travel? No, it's never too far to travel. I would love to go to Kansas City. I've never been there. I've never even been to Missouri in my life, but I'd like to because my father graduated from Missouri. He's a Mizzou Tiger. He loved Missouri. I don't know why the fuck he even went there either. It's a good college, but that's where he graduated from. And if I never go to Missouri for any other reason, that's why I would like to go, just to see where he went to college. That's all. Maybe taking a Mizzou basketball or football game. Could Tony and Cyrano Salerno have overthrown the Chin for proper leadership of the family? If Tony had done this early enough, do you think he could have insulated himself enough to avoid the indictments? With Tony at the helm, what do you think the future projection of the family would have looked like? I don't think Tony wanted it. I don't think he ever would. I mean, seriously, I think he was a guy that was happy with where he was at. And money wasn't a motivator for him because on his own, he was worth $1 billion. And I think when you have that much money on your own, what the fuck you need the headaches for? You know what I mean? But I don't think he would have ever tried to overthrow anybody. I think he was content where he was. However, I say this, if he had wanted to, could he have? Listen, money buys a lot of things, you know, and the Chin was a sneaky fuck at the same time. Guys used to laugh because they said, how does a guy botch a fucking hit and become a boss? You know, that's sort of the stuff I hear sometimes. But did Tony Salerno have the clout? Absolutely, 100%. But you got to remember, a lot of those unions that Cyrano was controlling was gifted from the Chin. The Chin picked who was running those. It's not like Tony says, I'm going to do this. No, I mean, maybe he goes to the Chin and says, I want my kid brother to run this. It'd be a good idea for him. Everything has to be green lit. And I think a large part, a large part of Vinny the Chin's success is because of Tony Salerno. Legitimately. It really was because of Tony. But did Tony have the clout? Absolutely, 100%. But you got to admire the guy. He took a 100-year pinch for nothing. He never complained. He never uttered a word. Do you think if La Cosa Nostra had really stepped up their drug game and gotten into business with Pablo Escobar, would they be a bigger force to deal with today? Or would have indictments toppled that empire? Well, I think loosely they were to some degree involved with Pablo Escobar. Not like on a person to person basis, but I think much of the narcotics in the 1980s came right from Escobar. But the thing is Escobar was funded and helped by the CIA for over 20 years, right? So without them, Escobar never becomes what he becomes. But here's a little interesting fact. Escobar took what he saw Totorino do and applied it to Colombia. I mean, that's sort of the acumen that Escobar had. He didn't, he was not like enamored with fucking Scarface and all this shit. He was enamored with gangsters. And he ran his empire like a fucking gangster. And the thing is like he admired them, but Escobar was a gangster himself. And I think if they had gotten directly involved with him, it would have been over with. And don't forget, the land that Gambino and others bought in Venezuela that we talked about on this show, who do you think they sold that land to? What do you think that airstrip was used for post-1982? Pablo Escobar. All right, if Genovese doesn't call the Appalachian meeting and get everybody pissed off, will he eventually grow his family into the most lucrative of the 5 families and become boss of bosses by default? I do think that. I think that that's legitimately, Andrew, what would have happened. I think he would have become the biggest and most powerful. And I don't think you would ever see the complete rise of Carlo Gambino. Unless Gambino moved on him in a different thing. And we can't really play that out because that's just such a stretch. But I would agree with you in principle that that's likely what would have happened. I've always wondered this. In the Bananas War, most of the guys that stayed on the side of Joe Bonanno were actually young Americanized guys. And while the Sicilians were with Gaspar de Gregorio, I wonder how this happened. For all those old tradition nonsense that Joe spewed, all of the zips went with Gaspar. I feel like there's a missing piece here, like something I'm not seeing. Well, there's a few things. Number one, right? So Joe left the entire family to fend for themselves by faking the kidnapping. And then he puts his son in charge, who didn't know the difference between Linguini from Ziti. I mean, he was pretty much a dunce in every sense. Nobody respected him. Nobody liked him. And the guys felt that he always is in that position because of nepotism. And that was the big reason why Billy Bonkers got the nod to take over the family. And it left everybody else in the lurch. And it created a huge vacuum and a war within the family. And during that war, where the fuck was Joe? He was hiding. He threw his own son to the fucking lambs. And I think Old World Zip saw Joe for what he was. A man of self-entitlement and self-grandizing honor. Read his book. I couldn't get through 5 fucking pages. I did read it, but it's all about him, how important he was. I never sold drugs in my life. The fuck you didn't. Fuck out of here. Those guys wanted a leader, somebody who was tough, not a poster boy for a fucking inhaler and an Atkins diet. All right, so this is the last question of the Q&A. Who do you think took the most pride in their work? Murder rackets, and who do you think adored being a mobster, and who do you think just despised being one? Well, the most pride, probably somebody, I don't know, probably somebody like, I think if we look at it of who loved being a gangster, true and true, guys like Nino Gaggi, Neil Delacroce, John Gotti, Jimmy Burke, Joe Watts, and the list just goes on and on. Jacob Shapiro, Meyer Lansky, Lucky Luciano. I mean, that list will go on forever, right? Who hated it? I mean, can we really even say or mention one motherfucking guy who hated being in that life? I mean, they all joined on their own accord, right? They might have regarded it because they end up going to fucking jail. But to my knowledge, there's never been a made guy who walks into mass, confesses all his sins, and says, I'm retired. Doesn't happen. And guys likely who hate that life, you know what we call them? Rats. Plain and simple. That's what they are. All right, so those are all the questions we got. Sorry, guys, I do a longer Q&A, but I can't just invent questions on my own. Comes from you, the people. All right, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we are going to get to Joe Bonanno and Bill Bonanno being rats. Stay tuned on Mob Talk Radio.
Each day through my window, I watch her as she passes by. I say to myself, you're such a lucky guy to have a girl like her. It's truly a dream come true. Out of all the fellas in the world, she belongs to you. But it was just my imagination running away with me. It was just my imagination running away with me. Soon we'll be married and raise a family. Oh yeah, a cozy little home out in the country with 2 children, maybe 3. I tell you, I can't visualize it all. This couldn't be a dream, for too real it all seems. But it was just my imagination once again running away with me. Tell you it was just my imagination running away with me. Every night on my knees I pray, dear Lord, hear my plea. Don't ever let another take her love from me, or I will surely die. Her love is heavenly. When her arms enfold me, I hear a tender rhapsody. But in reality, she doesn't even know me. Just my imagination
Alrighty. So we are back on Mob Talk Radio. And at this point, we are going to get into another segment of the Rat Files, which we'll probably do next week and the week after. We are not going to get to Philly this week. So I apologize to everybody. We will get to that next week. I just want to, just for the sake of my headaches of rendering everything, we're going to really try to keep these podcasts to an hour and a half, 2 hours max, just because we're doing the visual stuff. So we are going to get into the Rat Files. And so last week, we talked about Frank Lefty Rosenthal, Rocco Scafitti, and Harry Riccobaney. And we got a lot of emails from all of you about the shock that Harry Riccobaney talked. And the reality is, he did, as well as the other two we just mentioned. Now, a lot of people get this entire thing confused, okay? A rat is anybody who gives up anything about anybody, okay? If you listened to our live the other night, you heard me and Tom LaVecchia debate, and it was a good debate. So go back to our last live and look at me and Tom talk about this discussion or this topic. And we debated whether there was a hierarchy to ratting. And to me, there's not. You either are or you aren't. A rat is a rat is a rat. You know, and so I was really the first person on the scene to call Michael Franzese a rat before anybody else. I was the first to tell you that Harry Riccobaney was a rat. And I've been the only one that's told you that Joe Bonanno and his son Bill were rats. And for some odd reason, a lot of people refuse to believe it. Even when over the years I've posted page after page after page after page of documents proving it. There is some validity in what that other bosses drop dimes to control the flow of the action on the streets. And that doesn't make them worse or better than Joe Bonanno at all. It makes them really, at the end of the day, the same exact fucking thing. Is there a difference between what Joe Bonanno said versus others? Yes, absolutely. But does that mean person A is worse than person B? No. It's the same action, but person A, who gives up more information or hurts or damages more people, just glows a little more brightly red than other people. You know, so today we're going to talk about Joe Bonanno, Bill Bonanno, who ran to the feds. The same way that Harry Riccobaney went. Bill Bonanno went the same way. Joe Bonanno went the same way. And with everything we do, there's a reason in the background. And so the background that we need to regurgitate begins with Joe Bonanno attempted to hit the commission, which included Tommy Lucchese, Carlo Gambino, and Frank DeSimone. Bonanno had always felt handicapped by friendships. In the powerhouse of Genovese, Lucchese, and Gambino left the Bonanno family, neutered for the most part. When it would come to commission votes, Bonanno knew he was always going to be bullied and outvoted. And this issue with Joe Bonanno goes back almost to the day that he took over his own crime family in the 1930s. Joe Bonanno from day one was a thorn in the side of the mafia, and especially other mob bosses. And when Lucky Luciano was plotting the demise of Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano, it was Bonanno who played both sides of that fence, irritating Luciano to no end. In fact, in a few instances, suggestions were made to kill Joe Bonanno early on, but Luciano refused. Why he refused likely was because he needed to use Bonanno against other people. I don't know Lucky Luciano. I never met him. I'm not John Panisi, and I'm not going to tell you his ghost came into my fucking house and gave me the reasons. All right? But Luciano knew what a fucking snake Joe Bonanno was. And sometimes it's better to leave the snake in the garden to kill the rats than to deal with the problem later on down the line. And the reality is that Bonanno did Luciano a huge favor. Because like I said, he played both sides against one another. He ran to Masseria telling him not to trust Luciano. And that Luciano was planning some sort of coup against him. But Luciano ends up beating Masseria to the punch. And it's also been said that Joe Bonanno wanted the entire mafia for himself in those early days. And a lot of the problems for Luciano aligning with everybody was that Joe Bonanno would not get on board. He wouldn't make a decision, but finally, as history tells us, he does. Luciano whacks Maranzano and then slowly begins to reform the mafia. Now, why on earth he gave Joe Bonanno a stake in the commission is beyond my understanding. But I do think it had a lot to do with Canada, narcotics trafficking, and booze coming out of Canada. I think ultimately it was a money decision, whether Luciano liked it or not. Bonanno was an integral part to the operations of the mafia. He had contacts other people needed. Maybe Luciano thought if Bonanno got what he wanted, he might just shut the fuck up and be happy. But Luciano would be wrong about that. So as we know, Joe Bonanno tries to move on the commission. Joe Magliocco, who wanted to be recognized by the commission, was upset about that. And Bonanno used him in the sense that he needed somebody he could trust. And he put things into motion and likely played on Magliocco's frustration and anger. And Magliocco was probably likely promised to be the Bonanno's number 2, because it's my belief that Joe Bonanno didn't want a commission and that Bonanno was going to attempt to restructure the entirety of the mafia and name himself boss of bosses. I don't think he could have carried it out, but his goal was to merge and take it all over for himself. And it would never be, because Magliocco hands the list of hits to Joe Colombo, who is said to have been a proficient hitman, but there's no files to prove that he was ever prolific at anything. Joe Colombo, sensing that this could be trouble, runs to Gambino and Lucchese and tells them. We can argue whether he could have pulled it off or not, but I don't think that would have ended well for Colombo, and I think he truly saw that Joe Bonanno was using him, and Magliocco too, and that he would be sacrificed to appease the others who were going to be angry. So when Carlo finds out, he summons Magliocco and Joe Bonanno to a meeting over it. Bonanno flees out of the country and hides in Montreal, scared out of his fucking mind, only creating friction between the Catronis and the New York Commission. Magliocco, for his part, as we know, admitted to his own role, refusing to name Joe Bonanno as a co-conspirator. So here's Magliocco standing in front of the commission, knowing he could be killed. He refuses to fucking out Joe Bonanno. Stand up. But the commission knows better, because Magliocco didn't have the brains or the powers that Joe Bonanno had. So they sanction and toss Magliocco out on his ass, and they let him live. They sent many guys to Montreal to speak to Joe Bonanno, including Sam the plumber, DeCavalcante, and others. And Bonanno tells Sam DeCavalcante more or less to tell Gambino to go fuck himself. And he doesn't acknowledge or take orders from any commission. And that's an easy thing to say when you're protected in Montreal. 5 times the commission asked Joe Bonanno to come back to New York and settle it. And I think, and listen, I don't know this for a fact, but I think Gambino somewhat respected how Joe Bonanno felt about the situation. I think he got it on a visceral level. But at the same time, Gambino and Lucchese continued to ask Bonanno to come back. And the fact is, he refused. And he led them to believe that he had been and that leads them to believe that he's the mastermind of the whole thing. Magliocco was a man. He owns up to it. He took his lumps like a fucking man. And under questioning, refused to out Joe Bonanno. So with Joe Bonanno hiding out, Bill Bonanno, the bumbling son, takes over the crime family. Bill was the consigliere of the family at the time, and he ends up assuming control by nepotism. His promotion infuriates the family as Bonanno got the position, like I just said, without acumen or willingness. It was just nepotism. Bonanno wasn't a street guy. He didn't even grow up in New York City. He was raised in Arizona at a private school. What the fuck did he know about the streets? As Bonanno sits in the chair, Gaspare de Gregorio, who had been the logical next in line, forms his own splinter cell of the Bonanno crime family, which we saw today. Tory Bonanno tried to defend by saying, well, they defected, so we did the right thing, we ratted. The crew, which was led by Gaspare, was supported not just by the commission, but also by Stefano Magaddino. And Magaddino had an ongoing turf fight with Bonanno in Canada, and the commission knew that the instability created by a boss hiding and his bumbling son attempting to ride the waves was a horrible idea. Magaddino and the commission also felt that Joe Bonanno would not leave his son in the lurch, and that maybe it was a way to get Joe out of hiding. Like, you're going to leave your kid in charge, all hell's getting ready to break loose. Maybe they thought he would come back. What man would throw his son to the wolves like that? And the answer is simple. Joe just basically threw his son to the wolves. Good luck. Magaddino backing Gaspare, and then the commission was a message to Joe Bonanno that his days were done. And as we know, the Bonanno Wars would begin. And eventually the commission throws out both Joe and Bill Bonanno from the mafia. They were both thrown out of the mob. Both were expelled and told not to get involved in any more Cosa Nostra business again, and if they did, they were going to be killed. Some have said, and I've never said this publicly because I can't prove it, but some people have said that Gambino put a murder contract on both of them. But I don't believe that to be the case, because if there had been, they would have been killed without hesitation. But there's been talk that there was, or at least it was discussed. Even after all of that, Joe and Bill Bonanno refused to go away. And the choice for the family was simple. Either back Joe and Bill or risk being killed. And if you sat on the fence, you were going to be killed by either side. And Bonanno essentially splits his family into two sides. And it was bad for business. But like I said, Joe did this shit while he was in hiding. And he throws his son to the wolves, who was inept in every single way and couldn't carry himself, let alone a crime family. In 1964 is when all of this ratting begins. October 21st of 1964, after Bonanno splits his family into shambles and after the mafia kicks them both out, Joe Bonanno allegedly gets kidnapped in New York City and is not seen again for 19 months. And the kidnapping never happened the way that Bill Bonanno claims, or Joe, because it was staged for Bonanno to avoid a Senate hearing and also set the stage for what I believe was a plan for Bill Bonanno to begin telling on everybody else and ratting. If Joe wasn't going to be given what he wanted, he would, by proxy, find a way to get it done. And Joe actually takes off to Montreal and then moves back and forth from Arizona, California, Italy, and Canada, and then he hides in upstate New York at a cabin. And there were two reasons for this. Number one, the Bonannos wanted to facilitate him. They knew that the FBI would want to find Bonanno, and they wanted to frame Magaddino with the kidnapping because he was the thorn in their side. And it was Bonanno's plan to stage the kidnapping in a plot to overthrow the mafia by giving up information. And that coincides directly with the first memo of an informant in the Bonanno crime family. And we know that to be the one and only Bill Bonanno. And even for those who claim that it never happened, you have to ask yourself first and foremost, how the feds had such great intel about the Bonanno wars. 64 through 68, the feds would learn so much, just not about the Bonanno crime family, but the warring factions and other bosses in New York City. The FBI were told where to place bugs and hangouts where Gaspar de Gregorio was and other mob families. Who else would know that information? Nothing was ever mentioned in the intel about where to place the bugs on Bill Bonanno, but seemingly the FBI knew where to go against others who were against the Bonannos. The FBI had a list of those who were loyal to Joe Bonanno and those who weren't. Those who were against Joe and Bill were fed basically fed intel about them and their crimes, and those men, their locations, their relationships, and more. All of this intel shows up on FBI reports, which we've posted on our YouTube community page. While the name on these files can be redacted in many senses, we know it to be Bill Bonanno because eventually it would come to light. And as I said, when you trace the informant number and you cross-reference with other FBI index numbers and you cross-reference with other FBI reports, it makes it very clear. And it doesn't take a leap to figure out who that was. Then there were the memorandums from Altoona Prison and other jails where the FBI was there to see Bill Bonanno. So for anybody to say that it isn't Bonanno, doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about. And if you look at the screen, and I read this verbatim, what other mob guy has a problem with his father getting kidnapped? Name me one other person who had this problem. So don't tell me that it's not Bill Bonanno. We know it is. Tory Bonanno even admits they ran to the feds. So for anybody saying this is nonsense, obviously you're wrong. A report from June of 1967 describes in great detail the FBI's attempt to use old case agent named S.A. Anderson to revive his friendship with informant Bill Bonanno. Like the informant, Bonanno has to deal with a personal problem involving his father after Joe Bonanno was kidnapped, and he was left to lead a crime family against anti-Bonanno forces. He was a sitting duck with a murder contract on his head. Men that Bill Bonanno would have naturally turned to for help in the past, like Joe Magaddino or Stefano Magaddino, were all dead or had turned against them. And this probably created an incredible amount of angst inside of Bill Bonanno. Special Agent Richard Anderson likely exploited that vulnerability to gain his confidence and develop him as an informant, which is what he did. So according to the report, Bonanno was an enthusiastic and valuable source, at least early on. Bonanno's problem was partially resolved when Joe Bonanno reappeared suddenly and resumed control of the family, which we know didn't happen. And this is probably when the informant stopped giving as much information at a high level that he had done in the past, because according to FBI reports, he became difficult to handle. And it would only seem natural, I guess, that Bill Bonanno would be less inclined to talk, given that his father's absence caused him to cooperate in the first place, which is nonsense. That's just the FBI sort of putting a nice rainbow around it. And Bill Bonanno had his problems. He couldn't outlast his enemies, and the commission was against him and his father. And he turns really to the only help he could, ratting. Just when Joe Bonanno began ratting, I suspect was much earlier on than we know, but the first provable instance of this is in August of 1967, but I believe it to be a little earlier. And that memo was information that only Bill Bonanno would have had. And we posted that memo over to our YouTube community page, so you can go check that out there. In addition to that memo, Bonanno identified Paul Siaka and Paul Crociata and Frank Mari as members of a rival faction of Joe Bonanno. The memo also details the meeting between Bill Bonanno and those men. By that time, Gaspari de Gregorio had been asked to step down. Bonanno was able to provide agents about all mob families, and he did. He spoke at length about Tommy Lucchese's entire past, all his crimes, and he tips the feds off as to who was taking over that family because Tommy had just passed away. So don't tell me he didn't give no information other than his enemies, you prick. A few months after Bill Bonanno was persuaded to resume cooperating with the FBI, 3 members of the anti-Bonanno opposition were machine-gunned to death in the most violent episode of the entire Bonanno War. The FBI's stated objective when recontacting Bill Bonanno in 1967 was to instill in him the proper perspective and lay the groundwork for accelerated activity on his part in the interest of the FBI. They wanted Bill Bonanno to rise to the head of his family and perhaps eventually gain a seat on the commission. So there you go. That's really the truth about why they're doing this. Bill and Joe are using the FBI to get what they fucking want. Bill and Joe Bonanno had lost their rank and file support. So did the FBI actively encourage Bonanno to continue to fight beyond his intended limits? Absolutely. Keep shooting, keep shooting, keep shooting. And this is why Bill and Joe refused to back down, because they had FBI support. Bonanno would also explain to agents the problems within the Colombo crime family. It's through Joe Bonanno that we know that the FBI knows how everything went down with Joe Colombo. How do you think we know this? We know this because it came from Bill and Joe Bonanno. He explained that Colombo was backing Paul Siaka, and because Colombo knew the commission could control Siaka, Colombo had designs about taking over turf control by the Bonannos in Brooklyn. But I kind of have a hard time believing that, because Colombo had his own share of bullshit going on. And I think this is Bonanno placating the feds to go after Colombo for the disrespect about running back and telling Tommy Lucchese and Carlo Gambino what was going to happen. The FBI would note that the information that Bonanno was providing was high up intel, and that regular members on the street would not have access to any of this kind of information. Bonanno would tell agents that during a recent trip he made alone to Europe to visit his mistress, he was able to reveal the exact length of the trip, the itinerary, the full name of the mistress, and what they did together. And as I said, I believe Bonanno was talking prior to 1967. And I think it's closer to 1961 and 1962. But the first time it's actually mentioned is 1964. The FBI report produced in September of that year explained that the feds wanted to arrange some private interviews with Bill and Joe Bonanno in an attempt to get them to cooperate. And according to that memo, Bill Bonanno agreed to cooperate fully on that day along with Joe. However, Bill didn't manage to really start giving them a ton of shit until October 21st of 1964. And as we said, this is designed specifically after his father gets kidnapped. Well, the fake kidnapping. And it's just for optics. Nothing more, nothing less. What also proves that Bonanno was a rat is that in his silly fairy tale book, He describes fleeing New York City for 2 weeks after his father was kidnapped for his own safety, and allegedly he hid out with Bonanno mobsters. However, that's a huge fucking lie. We know that because Bonanno was actually in Canada to meet with his father and FBI agents. We know this because there's an FBI memo from December 23rd of 64, just a month after Joe disappears. We also know this because of the Catrone's files that Bonanno was hiding out in Montreal at the time. Bill was there to consult with his father, but took meetings in a hotel with unnamed men, which I believe to be agents of the FBI, because after this memo, the FBI stopped looking for Joe Bonanno, suddenly. And as we said earlier, the premise was to use his father's kidnapping as a reason to be seen meeting with agents. But in fact, he was meeting with agents and with his father to drop information on their enemies. Rumors began to spin in the streets that Bonanno was not kidnapped, but really was actually being hidden away because he was giving up information. That's a lot of the reason why I think Gambino never moved on him. And I think a lot of guys suspected this specifically because Bonanno suddenly reappears in New York City. And the FBI worked complicit with the NYPD to arrest Bonanno immediately to make it look right optic-wise. So who do you think arrested Joe Bonanno? Special Agent Anderson. There you go. That's what proves that it was an optic move. Bill would give up everybody and their mother. And we don't know when he specifically stopped either. Many claim that it ended in 68. But I know that not to be the case because when Bill would take a pinch some years later, as the Bonannos were attempting to gain a foothold in California, he was met in a cell and continued to engage in ratting. Further memos of Bill Bonanno's cooperation in an interview that took place in a jail in Tucson, Arizona. On the early morning of January 1st of 1965, Bonanno had arrived in Tucson, his hometown, a few days earlier after hiding out in New York and New England for 2 months. He was promptly arrested as a material witness into his father's kidnapping. He spent 2 days in a prison cell where he secretly agreed to be interviewed by the FBI. That interview took place over 5.5 hours, and so much of what Bill Bonanno likely revealed is not included in these excerpts. The report was produced by the FBI's New York office, which suggests that agents from there traveled to Tucson to conduct the interview. Who do you think was the guy that went there to conduct that interview? Special Agent Richard Anderson. What a shock. If we assume, that Anderson travels to Tucson to conduct that interview, which we know he did, it raises a lot of suspicion that Bonanno had already explored the possibility of ratting prior to that. Otherwise, why talk to Anderson when Bonanno could have easily lied to the local agent who arrested him, who he knew quite well? Did Bonanno ask for Anderson? He was sent because Bonanno fell under the purview of the New York office. Did Bonanno crack only after one night in jail? No, he immediately started talking. So Bill Bonanno's statements about his father's kidnapping were, pretty consistent actually with what he wrote in his memoirs. Bill Bonanno told agents he had no prior knowledge of his father's kidnapping, but put the blame on a rebel group. He added that he didn't know the fate of his father, and he said his father's soft heart was his undoing. That's the reason why he's ratting. Instead of crushing the rebel group at the first sign of trouble, Joe Bonanno insisted that his son settle his differences without bloodshed and go to the feds. That's exactly what he tells these people in a jail. And so there's FBI teletypes. It's the subject is La Cosa Nostra, Arizona conspiracy. As the Bureau is aware, the NYO expended a considerable effort to develop Bill Bonanno, a live member source in the Bonanno crime family of Cosa Nostra. During the early part of his development, he furnished information of considerable value to the Bureau. During this time, the informant had a personal problem involving his father, which was capitalized on his development, which resulted in Special Agent Anderson being able to develop an insanely close relationship with him and his father. S.A. Anderson, playing on this problem in a sympathetic manner, was able to completely gain the confidence of this La Cosa Nostra member who is extremely suspicious of all law enforcement officers. Following the partial resolution of this relative's problem, the transfer of S.A. Anderson to Minneapolis, the informant has been difficult to handle. In other words, he didn't want to talk to anybody but S.A. Anderson. As the Bureau is aware, the informant's family is and has been some time in a state of influx. The New York office feels that at time it is appropriate to capitalize on this state of flux in which the informant may lose his standing within the family. So this is them saying, let's back him now. Let's back him. We'll get rid of everybody else and we'll back him. And that's really what they're saying. It is felt the same approach which was initially made should be repeated in an effort to reconfirm the informant in the Bureau's service. New York, 92-2300. Special Agent Anderson is the only agent whom the informant will talk to and trust. And this is the only special agent that has been able to get information to develop a full rapport with this individual. In order for the optimum effectiveness to be made by the New York office, it is felt that the Bureau should make use of Special Agent Anderson they should use Special Agent Anderson's personal relationships with the informant and his father. If the effectiveness of this source can be reinforced by the contact of Special Agent Anderson, given the proper direction thereafter, it is felt that he has the potential to rise to the head of it's felt this part kills me. It's felt that he has the potential to rise to the head of his family and perhaps gain a seat on the commission. The New York office strongly requests that Special Agent Anderson be authorized to come to New York, to whom this contact with the informant, which it is hoped, will lay the groundwork for accelerated activity on his part in the interest of the Bureau. If this can be accomplished, the informant has the definite potential of penetrating the mafia at an extremely high level. It is anticipated that Special Agent Anderson would remain in New York for 1 week and not to exceed 2 weeks, depending on the difficulties of contact with our source and the amount of time that's necessary to give him the proper instructions on how to achieve this. 1/14/1965. This comes out of Legat, Ottawa. From the FBI director, FBI La Cosa Nostra conspiracy, enclosed for Legat, Ottawa is a copy of a New York letter to the Bureau, 12/23/1964, captioned Bill Bonanno, Joe Bonanno, top echelon criminal informant program. Enclosed letter details a trip with New York that Bill Bonanno, where he was in touch with individuals operating as a part of or associated with members of Cosa Nostra. Information has been developed from a number of highly confidential sources, which include Joe Bonanno and Bill Bonanno, in positions to report on high-level Cosa Nostra activity, where there is a membership group of the mafia in Montreal, which over the years has operated as a part of the New York family, headed by commission member Joseph Bonanno. Teletype, Urgent 2, Director FBI, 92-1625, and SACS Buffalo to Phoenix, 92-534. From New York, unsubs to Joe Bonanno, victim obstruction of justice, conspiracy. Salvatore Vincent Bonanno, also known as Bill, son of the victim, was interviewed by Pima County jail officials, Tucson, Arizona, by Special Agent Anderson from approximately 12:50 a.m. until 5 o'clock in the morning, December 31, 1964. Alleged kidnapping of Joe Bonanno, October 21, 64. Bonanno stated the kidnapping of his father was well calculated in a planned job pulled off by Stefano Magadino and 3 other individuals from a rebel group within his father's family. Bonanno advises that he does not know the fate of his father, and at this time, nor does he know his whereabouts. He stated that he knew that meetings were to be held on Monday and Tuesday, at which time the fate and the rest of the family would be resolved. And that is to say, if they could again operate freely on the streets without fear of reprisal from other families. Bonanno stated, "Why do you bother us? We're nobody now." Bill advised that group remaining with his father has a spokesman for them who is attempting to arbitrate the situation. When queried about the spokesman, he stated, "You know who it is. Does the name Joe Notaro ring a bell to you?" And then he smiled, indicating that this was the person that Bonanno had advised when the situation was resolved and agreements are reached. Then he says Gaspari de Gregorio is going to come out heavy. He's going to bring out guns. And what this appears to be is Bonanno is basically just telling him everything. And then Bonanno doubles down and he says, "I don't really like de Gregorio, but he knows what's going on. He never leaves. That's the guy you need to watch." Then they queried Bonanno on the organization itself, and Bill stated for the first time that my father has been the boss of Cosa Nostra since 1930. I cannot remember the exact date. September 19th, 1930, he explained to them, was after the death of Salvatore Maranzano, who was a boss prior to Joe Bonanno's taking over. Bill would go on to say it must have been around that time then, I think. Bill stated, now I guess you will make another Valachi out of me. Bonanno stated that his father had been 15. He had between 15 and 20 captains in the crime family until his recent trouble with the commission would name every single member and crimes that they were involved in. And at that time, it says it was felt best not to press Bill Bonanno anymore at this particular time because he was giving shit up. Bonanno would give intel on Vic Catroni. Now, remember when we did that series? We said that somebody was 100% tipping off the Canadian authorities on people. Excuse me, let me rephrase that. Bonanno, remember when we did the Canadian series? We said that someone was 100% tipping off Canadian law enforcement, right? And it's not long after Catroni explains to Joe Bonanno, you got to leave Canada because he's causing headaches for everybody. And suddenly Catroni begins to have problems with law enforcement, right? And it's always been my belief that even after Bonanno sent Galante to Canada, Catroni helped facilitate the authorities finding out about Galante and his deeds. So I can't prove that, but there's enough going on to suggest that somebody got in somebody's ear. But Catroni wanted Bonanno the fuck out of Canada. He wanted all Bonanno representation out of Canada, but we're never going to know. Bonanno would go on to name Angelo Bruno and other mob bosses who were in control of their families, their hierarchies, in every single state that was represented by the mafia. And in the end, the FBI used that information to corroborate a ton of shit. So there's no telling how many men might have gone to prison for what Joe Bonanno and Bill Bonanno told them. Joe and Bill Bonanno had no way to get around the commission, and the end result was providing the FBI with information so that they could get the heads of the commission arrested or murdered to take over. Joe and Bill Bonanno believed, even into the 1980s, that they could take over the entire mafia again. And it was truly the last card that Bonanno had in his tricks, and it failed. And in sort of finality, Joe and Bill Bonanno never had the makings of a varsity athlete. But they didn't just stop there. When they were trying to muscle in San Jose and they were shaking down car dealerships, Bill Bonanno got arrested again. And in prison, when he got arrested for that, he started squealing on everybody again. Giving information about the Dragnas, giving information about anything that they could. And so I want to close it out by saying they were informants. They gave up information. Irrefutable. And there will be many of you, and rightfully so. And I will agree with this statement to some extent. Well, that was the time period. A lot of guys were, in fact, in many different ways, dropping dimes on each other. You're right. Doesn't make it right. And I'm not saying that one is higher or lower than the next. But the reality is to sit there and say, well, they only informed on their enemies, so it doesn't count. No, it does count. It does count. And if you've ever read Joe Bonanno's book, it's very interesting. There's a lot of mistruths. But if you read that book, it's all about him and about how the mafia was supposed to be this and that. But this is a guy who never played by the rules. This is a guy from the 1930s wanted to take over everything. And he thought the only way that he could accomplish that by murdering everybody to get to the top, which is a gangster thing to do, don't get me wrong. But they never stopped giving intel. And for anybody that says, well, everybody else, no, they did it because the only way that Joe Bonanno could ever get back into the mafia, the only way he could ever do it is by getting everybody arrested. And this guy actually believed that allowing the FBI to help them achieve that the FBI would leave them alone. Which brings up a bigger conspiracy theory and a bigger conspiracy thought. If the FBI could have gotten this done and they put Joe Bonanno on the commission and he forms one universal mafia, which is what he wanted to do. He didn't want 5 families. He wanted to be the boss of everything. No more 5 families. I'm the boss of everything. Could you imagine how many fucking people, if he was able to accomplish that with the FBI's help, can you fucking imagine the amount of people he would have put in prison? Thousands. And as it stands today, we don't know how many people that Joe and Bill put in prison. And that's not all. I could have done this show and shown you 3,000 pages of paperwork of information they gave up. But at that point, it becomes like ad nauseum. You know what I mean? So there you have it. They were informants. It is what it is. And so listen, guys, I know this is a shorter show than you guys are used to. And I appreciate it, but it's going to be so much easier uploading this. So next week when we come back, we're going to do another segment of Rat Files. We're going to do another Q&A. We are going to get to the Philadelphia mob war, and that'll probably be over an hour and 10 minutes of material on its own. And we'll wrap up the Philly mob wars. And it brings up an invariable question. You know, how much more can you really say about Philly? Really, you can't. I don't have much more to say about it after that. But it's an interesting look at street politics in action. So I hope you guys have enjoyed the show. I hope that you're enjoying, well, I don't think anybody's enjoying seeing my fucking face. But I wanted to thank all of you. And don't forget, Sunday, 8:35, we're going to be live on YouTube. Come hang out. We're going to talk about a bunch of different stuff. It's going to be open forum. I'm probably not going to come with a lot of topics. I'm going to let you guys decide where the topics are going to go. But like I said, I try to keep it based on history, not current. Current's not where I want to go. So we'll see what the week brings. Enjoy your weekend. It's hot as fuck here. This light kills me. My God. But we will be back next week, and we will probably have over a 2 hour show next week. But I wanted to keep it an hour and a half to 2 hours max. I think that's the best thing for us to do. So in the meantime, any questions, reach out at mobtalkradioshow@gmail.com. And we will see everybody Sunday at 8:35. Don't be late. Do not be late to the show. So with all that being said, I'm out of here for the weekend. And we will see all of you Sunday night on another edition of Mob Talk Radio Live.